You're listening to The Tarot Diagnosis. I'm your host, Shannon. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and I also happen to have a love for tarot. Each episode, I invite you to reflect with me as I work to demystify the tarot and the human experience, all while exploring tarot's connection to mental and emotional health. While this podcast may feel therapeutic, it is not meant to take the place of psychotherapy. So grab your cards and join me as I work to create a pathway to better understand ourselves and those around us. Today, I'm sitting down with Theresa Reed, also known as the Tarot Lady. She's a tarot expert, astrologer, teacher, and author who has been reading tarot for over 40 years. She's the author of The Cards You're Dealt, How to Deal When Life Gets Real, and about a dozen other books. Theresa loves to teach because she believes everyone should know their astrological sign and have a tarot deck in their hands at all times. She's joining me today to explore some heavy topics that so many of us often feel resistance around, which is exactly what she focuses on in The Cards You're Dealt. Hi, Theresa.
Hi, Shannon.
So I'm so grateful to have you join me today on a discussion for some really important topics. Obviously, I'm a psychotherapist, so you have this new book, The Cards You're Dealt, where you're talking about grief and loss and tragedy, all within the realm of tarot. And I think it's something that was really missing in our field. So I'm really excited to have you here to explore some of these topics and dive a little bit deeper. But I'm curious, just right off the bat, what prompted you to even write The Cards You're Dealt?
That's such a great question. It's a book I actually wanted to write for a long time because I think there's a misconception, first of all, that tarot readers are always talking about romance. And we see this in the movies, that it's always about the tall, dark stranger. And one of the things that I found is, yes, people do talk about, love, and they talk about money, but so much of what comes to the tarot table is deeper and heavier than that. A lot of times people come to tarot readers when they're going through something hard and they need a safe space to discuss things and to process feelings. So tarot isn't just about predicting who you're going to meet. Tarot is very much a tool to help people navigate, I always say, this thing called life. And also, I have gone through things like grief and loss and illness and caregiving and all of these things. And all of us are going to go through it at one point or another. And I turned to tarot so much during those times that I'm like, this needs to be in a book, and there's really not a book on it. And so that was why I wanted this book to become a reality.
Something that I particularly appreciated throughout the book was your focus on grief. It's a topic that has personally taken me years to get comfortable with, even professionally, to be able to sit and work through that with clients. So, now I'm in the space where I'm so honored to be able to become more comfortable within the realm of grief and people who are grieving, because not a lot of people are. And so now to have this book where it almost feels like an invitation to step into that space without intimidation, because I think grief and bereavement in general, and even just loss and tragedy and everything that we face as humans in the world, can be so overwhelming and intimidating that we almost just want to turn a blind eye to it and pretend like it's not happening, which from a mental health perspective isn't great, because then that stuff just sits inside of us and it doesn't get processed. So, reading this book, I did find a lot of similarities between, my experience as a psychotherapist and then your experience as a tarot reader, especially in terms of this resistance that I think we both have seen in folks. So I would love for you to spend some time talking about what your experience is with that, word resistance, and how that shows up for the people who have come to you when they're, experiencing a loss or grief or tragedy, because that is a common theme here.
Well, I think the reason why there's resistance is because our culture really is death-averse and doesn't like to deal with these unsexy topics like grief. And grieving people are not fun to be around. And I'm saying that as somebody who's gone through grief. When we are going through these things, we're feeling a lot of heavy stuff that makes people incredibly uncomfortable. They're uncomfortable with our discomfort. So because, we are in a culture that really makes it uncomfortable, we are uncomfortable with people who are going through these things. And so what do we want to do? We want to get out of those conversations as quickly as possible. And therefore, the grieving never really gets to go full circle. And one of the things that I have found with people when they've come to the tarot table, it's a safe place to really discuss the heaviness of this stuff, because oftentimes other people don't want to hear it. And the other thing I want to add to that too, there's a book that I read by Megan Devine called "It's Okay That You're Not Okay," which talks a lot about, the unsexy side of grieving. And one of the things that she says is it's like a mess that we want to clean up. But I like to think of it more like laundry, that grief is like that laundry in the middle of the floor, and we want to fold it up and put it away into a neat place. But what happens then is at some point we're going to dig back in that closet and we're going to find it again. And it hasn't been dealt with. It's kind of like when you put those old pants that don't look good on you in the closet and then you pull it out and they just make you feel bad all over again.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a humorous way of saying it. But again, we are in a death-averse culture. We are in a grief-averse culture. No one feels comfortable talking about it. We want to sweep it under the rug. We want to forget about it. We don't want to be around grieving people. And we certainly also, when we're grieving, we don't want to burden anybody, because we're taught that it's a burden to be dealing with these heavy things. And it's not. It's a natural part of life.
Well, I love the metaphor of the laundry. I might borrow that with clients. It's so true. Often when I'm talking about grief with folks, I let people know that grief isn't something that ever goes away, especially when you've experienced a loss. Your life just starts to expand. But if you're not working through the grief to allow your life to expand, then it does continue to maintain this central focus, and it can be really debilitating. So, and you talk about a lot of the some really practical steps that you can take throughout your book to make sure that you, one, aren't feeling like a burden. And two, if you're someone who's working with someone, or not even working with someone, just around someone who's grieving, the things that you can do or say or shouldn't do and shouldn't say. But to go back, there was something you said a moment ago, and it made me think of something that Pema Chödrön says. And Pema Chödrön's one of my favorite Buddhist teachers. And she talks about how the concept of grief is basically really shines a light on our fear of moving closer to the truth. And it's something like that, not directly quoted. And I think that's more of what those of us who maybe aren't in an active state of grief experience when we are interacting with someone who is grieving. Because when we are experiencing someone who's gone through a tragedy or a loss, it really puts us in a place where we have to sometimes confront even our own mortality and our tolerance for the truth, or the fact that, maybe we've experienced tragedy that we haven't processed, or that we are inevitably going to experience death and loss and tragedy, is sometimes too much. And so, in fact, there was something in your book where I laughed at this because it's so true. You had mentioned about bereavement leave, which is typically 3 days in corporate America. And then it's okay, move on. And that just perpetuates this idea that we shouldn't be looking at grief and pain and tragedy. We're supposed to pretend that it doesn't exist. But when we pretend it doesn't exist, it's just because we're afraid of looking at reality. And another component of that, I think, is a lack of control. We don't have control over a lot of these things that might happen to us. And so it can be terrifying.
But, because we do live in a death-averse culture, I really refer to Stephen Jenkinson's work too. He wrote Die Wise. And he also talks about, and I agree with this and wrote about this in my book too, we want to keep the body alive no matter what. It's, again, when you mentioned about the feeling of control, we're trying to control that.
Right.
And we'll go through these horrific treatments and stuff just to try to get one more day. Because again, our culture, it does not support death. We are taught it's this terrible, painful thing that you need to fear, where death, just like grief, it's just another phase of life. It is something we will all face. And we need to find a way to face it with courage and love. And the other side of grief, by the way, is love. I mean, we grieve because we loved someone or something also. We sometimes grieve over our physical possessions, and there's no shame in that. People feel shame about them. Like, listen, I'm in love with my car. It's 20 years old.
Yes.
I know it's going to die. I love my car. I'm very attached. And so when you love someone, when you love something, I mean, that's why we grieve, because it's that absence of loss, that absence of love, that absence of, having that person or that thing in our lives. I mean, that's really hard to bear.
I'm so glad you brought that up. And that was another component of this book that I was happy to see you mention. And it was this idea of grieving, or really a spectrum of grief, not just the loss of a person, but the loss of things. And it's so funny that you just brought up the car, because I was in the same position. And I kid you not, last night, I was just in the car, our new car this morning, sharing with my partner a dream I had that I went and stole my old car because this car meant so much to me and I had to get rid of it when we moved. And in this dream, I had gone and found it and stole it from whoever bought it. But it's bizarre because it's,
And while it sounds ridiculous, I mean, that is something so many people can relate to. Yeah. And what happens when we grieve, especially if we grieve like a thing, we get shame thrown on us, aren't you, over that? Or, oh, it's just a physical possession. Or even sometimes there's some grief that we never want to talk about. People never want to talk about a miscarriage.
Right.
When a person has suffered a miscarriage or stillborn, a stillbirth, those again are topics we tiptoe around it. We don't know what to say. And so we come out with these platitudes and these things that we say that don't help people. No. And it makes it worse. So, as somebody who's had a miscarriage, I know that it was something you just need to get over it. You've got another baby to take care of. You don't have time for this. And I remember when I had my miscarriage, again, because it's a topic no one wants to talk about, my sister-in-law was watching my daughter while I was in the hospital, dealing with all that. And when I came home, the only thing she said was, "You need to keep your house cleaner."
Oh my gosh.
And it's like, because that was the concern. But I look at it now, it's like, why would someone say that? Because they don't want to deal with what I'm dealing with. So they're going to point at something else, something you need to do.
Right.
So that you don't have to deal with this and we don't have to deal with this. And it's all done now. Boom, boom, blammo. So for that situation, there was a lot of unresolved grief that didn't really get dealt with until much later. And that's the other thing when we don't deal with things like grief or even like shame or anger or whatever. At some point, it's going to come out. At some point, that stuff is going to come out. And oftentimes it comes out when you don't expect it, and sometimes in really inappropriate ways.
Absolutely. And that's another aspect of this that I appreciated you brought up, was this idea of miscarriage or even child loss or a stillbirth. The most complicated types of grief that I see in my practice are miscarriages and child loss. And it's interesting because, and I actually have a couple cases I'm working on right now. It's years later, because just like you said, there's often, you have to take care of this other child, or you have all these other responsibilities. People, and this goes back to, talking about death-averse culture and people being really uncomfortable and really having to face the truth. They just want to give you a solution, because a lot of times we're not taught, it's okay to sit with someone in their discomfort, and it's okay to acknowledge you have your own discomfort in that. That's normal. Of course, you're a human being who's having a really emotional, raw experience. It would be bizarre if you weren't having some sort of emotional reaction here.
Yes. And, for people, when they're around someone who's in these situations, it gets really, really funky when suddenly you're crying, bursting into tears, or whatever you're going through. Again, they just don't want to deal with it. And I do blame the way our culture talks about it. And oftentimes what you'll find that people will do is they'll spout platitudes.
Yes.
And they'll say things like, for example, with a miscarriage, well, you're young, you can have more, you can try again. That doesn't help anybody. That's what I was told. Or we get told something like, everything happens for a reason, which is my most hated statement ever. And I've been guilty of saying these things too.
Of course, we all have,
because we're taught that.
Yes.
And so we have to undo all these things we've been taught. We have to undo all these cultural things that make it so that we cannot honor these things in our lives in a healthy way. And we have to undo how we've been taught to support people because it ain't working.
Absolutely.
That's why they come to a tarot reader.
Right. I was actually just going to say, can we pull a card? We're like really getting into the thick of things. And I would love to bring tarot into this now. All right. Tell me.
I have the Wiser Tarot, just so folks know which deck I'm using.
Yes.
If you're listening to this as a audio, so you can visualize what the images are, because tarot is very much a visual thing. So what are we going to ask the cards? Just a card for guidance, or what would you like to ask?
I love to just pull for guidance. So let's see where it wants us to go moving forward. And I'm using Pamela Coleman Smith's Rider-Waite playing card deck. I've been I don't know if you can.
Neat.
I've been so in love with this lately. It's so tiny, and I don't know, it makes me feel good. So.
Well, the card I pulled is the Seven of Swords.
Oh.
And I mean, it's really interesting when you look at the Seven of Swords, because the figure looks like they are leaving something behind. They're gathering a few things, and they're moving forward, and there's a battle looming in the background. I mean, if there's ever a card of denial, this would be it. And so it really does feel like there's somebody here. I'm trying to get away from this situation. I'm not going to face it. I'm going to leave that behind for another time. And they're not even aware. They're like in denial about the storm that's going to be coming if they don't go back there and pick up those swords that they're leaving behind. So I think this really speaks to what we're talking about, is that you've got to go in there. You've got to deal with it. You've got to deal with the whole picture, not just the parts that are easy, because at some point that battle is going to land home. You're going to be right back in that tent. Also, I would say this card has a lot to do, of course, we see it as a theft card. And what happens when we are dealing with loss is we feel like something's been stolen from us. And that also creates so many other feelings. That's why grief is not just, I'm sad. Grief, we have angry. People blame, God, the universe, Buddha, whatever. There's so much of that also comes into grief, the feeling like somehow something has been stolen from me. And that's something to address.
What a perfect card to pull, especially like exactly where the conversation was headed. So I ended up pulling the Two of Wands, which I feel like is pretty similar to what we're talking about as well. But when we think about the Two of Wands and just two numerically, we have this representation of balance and duality here, right? So, we might be preparing to step into a new realm or idea or experience, which is really kind of what you're inviting folks who are reading your new book. The cards you're dealt to do is to explore a new terrain that they otherwise may have been really hesitant to explore, and to do so in a way that is both comforting and practical, and making sure that you're not just solely focused on this thing in front of you, but you're also looking out at the horizon, because that goes back to when I was talking about how when we're not exploring our grief, it takes up our whole world, right? So like if we're only looking at, this thing that we're holding, we're not seeing everything else. And then that just becomes our sole focus. So being able to, going back to two for balance, being able to balance looking at your grief and observing what's going on, but then also like looking around to see what else is, what exists for us, what's going to help us move through this, or, who we might be able to lean on to for support, which actually I feel like lends nicely into some of the practical advice that I feel like you talk quite a bit about in your book, which I think is really valuable, especially in terms of how you apply it to tarot. So I'd love for you to speak more on that, because I imagine writing this book too also meant that you had to do a lot of Two of Wands experiencing of, really self-reflection and observing your own life and your own grief.
Well, I also want to point out real quick before I answer that, in the Seven of Swords, notice there's two swords he's leaving behind, and you pulled the Two of Wands.
You're right.
So I think that's very interesting. And so here we're seeing these cards. Here the figure is trying to get away with it. They're leaving something behind. Whereas in the Two of Wands, there's a sense that I've dealt with it. I'm doing things in a healthy way. So and there's that theme again of two, which is balance.
Right.
So I really, really love that.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I totally dig that. Yeah. So, of course, that got me a little bit sidetracked. What was the question again?
Yeah, no, I really was just asking, because I imagine you...
Oh, the practical things.
Yeah, right. And having to really do some self-reflection on how you've dealt with things in your own life.
So I would have never been able to write this book like 15 years ago.
Right.
I would have never been. I mean, I had been through things in my life, obviously, but I went through some really heavy things with dealing with my dad, caregiving a partner. I mean, I'm almost 60 now. I'm heading towards retirement very soon. And so by this stage in life, it's very likely if you're this old, you are going to have, like a car, some dents and bumps.
Right.
And you're going to have dealt with things like loss and caregiving and illness. All of those things I've experienced. And so I have had a lot of situations that have been very challenging based around these topics. I've had clients who've gone through things that have been very hard, that I've helped them go through it together. And so I've had not just experience as a tarot reader, but a lot of life experience around these topics. And one of the things I found when I was going through these things, there wasn't the type of advice that I needed to, how do I deal with the fact that, I'm going to use an example. When my mother passed, she left my father in a financial mess.
Right.
They didn't have a will. I mean, these are practical things that we don't think about, that at some point you're going to maybe have to deal with, or the messy side of caregiving and making decisions for somebody who cannot make decisions for them. We don't think about it. It's hard to find the information out there. And so a lot of what I put in this book too was very practical things, so that we know how to support somebody. We know how to take care of ourselves, and even practical things. If you are dying, I wrote a whole thing in this book about it. Here's what you need to do to get ready,
right,
because it is something we're all going to face. And while that may sound again like some weird things included in a tarot book, listen, I want this to be a manual for people who are going through these things, so they can go through it with grace and maybe some good common sense, so we get through these passages in the best way possible. And tarot can be the perfect ally as you are going through these things and building the practical things you need to support yourself or the loved ones you're dealing with.
Yeah, everything that you just said was really important there, because, is the way that I utilize tarot is very much as a mirror to be able to access parts of ourself or our needs that may be deep in our subconscious that, we're either unaware of or trying purposely to avoid. So to be able to sit with your deck and pull cards to explore these topics that you also have a lot of great spreads in your book too, that I think are valuable to be able to say, okay, what am I not seeing here? What am I not thinking about? And to be able to have a conversation with your cards in a way that you haven't been able to have a conversation with the people in your life, because maybe you learned, we don't talk about these things growing up, or, no one talks about these things, so I never learned how to talk about these things. Or what do you mean? What is a will? What is an estate? What's a trust? What? So to be able to have some of that laid out in your book in a way that, okay, I know that I can go to my cards and feel comfortable, exploring what comes up. And then now I have these things that Theresa has pointed out. So maybe I should go and look into what these are, or talk to someone who's going to be able to guide me through this process. And really what you're doing, this goes back to something you said earlier, the concept of unlearning and relearning. You're also breaking a cycle. If you are someone who grew up not being able to talk about any of these things, now it's time to change that. Make sure that, your legacy and the people that you will eventually leave behind know how to go through this process in a really compassionate and graceful way, so that when things do come up, whether it's death or a tragedy or, an illness, we're not running around frantically unsure of what the hell to do at any given moment.
Exactly. And I got to tell you, so my family was one who didn't talk about this, didn't talk about that.
Yeah.
Typical. I'm a Gen Xer. That's what they were. You just didn't deal with things, didn't think about, again, these unsexy topics like illness or what happens if you have to pull a plug. These were things we were never discussing. And like I said, when my mother passed away, the mess she left for my father was outrageous. And I had to be in there fixing all of this. And my situation with my children is exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
We talk about everything. I mean, we are super, super close, and I've got everything set up for them. If anything happens to me, they know what to do. They know where everything is. They never have to worry. It's all laid out, right down to the songs I want played at my memorial.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm like, you're not going to have the headache that I have.
Right.
And this is what you need to know if I get ill. This is how I want to be treated. This is what I don't want. You know, I am like super, super clear. And so they know what to expect. They know what to do. They're not walking around with horse blinders on. And I'm very clear that, listen, my memorial, I don't want it to be all tears. I want you to share all my most outrageous stories and have a blast, because I have lots of outrageous stories. And, you know, so we have a lot of talks about this. We've totally broken the wheel of how I grew up and what my parents, how they dealt with things. And that's the way it should be. And I just hope, you know, my kids with any, I have one grandchild, if there's any more, but besides that, that we keep breaking any wheels that I might have created too in that process. Because you don't know. You might think I'm doing everything right. And your kids later on are like, well, let me just tell you, you made me feel this way about that. So I think one thing that tarot helps us to do is to be very conscious.
Yes.
And when we are conscious, we are going to be more likely not to create any new wheels, but to continue to break those old things down and to move forward in such a good, healthy way. Tarot is very good for that.
Absolutely. And this, you know, you bring up a good point of like curiosity too, being able to say, hey, like, let's be curious about what these experiences are going to be like, and making sure that you are taking away any sort of mystery around what this process might be like for you in the future, because it also allows us to not be afraid of it. You know, going back to that quote from Pema Chödrön, it's this fear that we have in it, you know, death and grieving and tragedy, it's all wrapped up in fear. So if we take the mystery away, we often take the fear away. Here's what I want. Here's what I need. And also, I think the way that you described this process, like, allows us to say, I'm going to respect and honor this person. And you being able to say, here, this is how I want to be honored through this process. Where a lot of people, you know, they're so afraid to talk about it because, you know, it's a sensitive topic, or, oh, I don't want to think about that. That's bad. Or even like superstitious stuff, magical thinking. Oh, if I think about it, it will happen. No. You need to be thinking about these things. So when it does inevitably happen, you are prepared for it. It's okay to be talking about these things. But I really think it's important to highlight the fact that when you are prepared and you're talking about these things and you're processing them, you're respecting yourself and you're respecting the people who are involved. That's really what it is. It's really honor and respect here.
Absolutely. And one thing that I've learned as a tarot reader is that when people come and sit at the tarot table, the greatest gift you can give them is your presence, to just witness them, whatever they're dealing with, however messy it is. I mean, that is such a beautiful, beautiful thing to do. We are honoring people. We're honoring their process. Again, tarot can help you to do that and to honor your own process. I'm really all about that. Let's be present. Let's be present with the good, the bad, the ugly. And also, we have got to stop the whole idea of death being a fearsome thing. Again, we always associate with a lot of pain, and well, I blame the culture, the movies.
Right.
You know, now when I was with my father died very peacefully. There was a lot of humor in his death, the way it went down. And, you know, we can look back at that situation. It's like, well, he went really well. He's ready to go. And it wasn't this fearful, horrible thing that we're taught. And so often that's what we think. We think of death like it's going to be like, you know, one of these horror movie things.
Right. And actually, you know, as we start to wrap up, I'm curious, you know, you talk a lot about culture in the book too. And I love how you even pointed out how some cultures, you know, respond and even celebrate death. And, you know, I'm curious, how would you encourage folks, you know, individuals and even communities to create space to open conversations around these types of topics? What would you say to them?
Well, first of all, we should celebrate life as we're here. We should be celebrating every day. You know, when I get out of bed in the morning and my feet hit the floor, the first thing I'll say is, oh, I got another day to get it right. You know, so I always approach life very much from that perspective.
Yeah.
And I think it really is important that we be grateful for the life that we have, number one. But I think communities do need to open up these conversations and to think about ceremonies and rites. Now, there are some cultures that do it very well, like I illustrated in the book. I mean, I love the fact that down in New Orleans, they have like a parade for folks with a band. I mean, come on.
I didn't know
now.
that. I love learning that. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, that is just fabulous. So if we start, first of all, again, living our best lives and helping others to live their best lives, and then starting to talk about, okay, how can we make this experience good for our community, good for our culture, good for our religious beliefs, or whatever it is? We have to just start the dialogue. And when we start talking about it, we can start thinking of ways that are going to be supportive and affirming rather than full of fear. So I think we just got to start those conversations.
Thank you so much for listening to The Tarot Diagnosis. You can follow us on Instagram and TikTok under the handle @TheTarotDiagnosis and join us while we pull daily cards and explore tarot and mental health in between podcast episodes. You can also subscribe to our podcast to make sure that you never miss an episode. If you have a topic or question that you'd like for us to explore on the podcast, you can contact us directly on our website, www.thetarotdiagnosis.com.